How do you define winning an election? Evan McMullin is not going to win the presidency, but victory is in his sights as he joins us for Balance of Power. The unaffiliated candidate is nearly in a three-way dead heat in Utah with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. He would be the first third-party candidate to win a state since George Wallace in 1968. He's on the ballot in Colorado and campaigned here this past week after joining us on Balance of Power. Evan McMullin, unaffiliated candidate for president, one of 22 on the ballot in Colorado, I would note. It's a crowded ballot. Thank you for your time.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Did you single-handedly create a swing state in Utah?
Oh, I don't know about that. I think Donald Trump created a swing state in Utah when he abandoned conservative principles, or when the party abandoned conservative principles by nominating him. People talk about Utah as being a red state or a Republican state, but like much of the Mountain West, I would rather call it a principled conservative state. These are people who are committed to conservative principles, namely that all people are created equal and that all should have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's why I think you saw Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton rejected so strongly by most Mountain West states by large margins, and that's why we're bringing our message first and foremost to the Mountain West.
When voters cast a ballot for somebody who is not going to win, they're sending a message, and then there's also the practical impact. So I'd like to unpack those two things. What is the message that you think your voters are sending? And then in Colorado, what would be the practical impact of voting for you?
Well, I would say, first of all, that there is an opportunity for us to win. Now, it's a 3-month presidential campaign, and the most likely, although still challenging path for that would be if the race between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump is very close in the Electoral College. If that's the case, we can win by blocking both of them from a majority.
In fairness, nothing suggests that that's going to happen because of how badly Trump trails.
Although I think both of these candidates, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, are so flawed that the race is still volatile enough that anything could happen in the remaining 2 weeks of the race. But yes, right now there's a big margin that makes it hard to block them both. All we can do is do our part, and that is win a state or 2 or 3. So that's what we're doing.
And what's the message sent by that?
Yeah, the message is, if we're able to do that, I mean, it's less about the message in that case and more just about the practical impact, which is we'll get a second chance to prevent Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump from becoming the next president of the United States, meaning that the election would then go to the House of Representatives and each state would get a vote. So there's a very practical impact there that potentially we could avoid having either one of these so deeply flawed major party candidates as our president. Now, if that doesn't happen, then you get into, okay, well, what does this all mean then? And what it means is if we're able to win a state or just perform very well in a number of states or in some states in a region, it sends a message to Washington, it sends a message to the Republican Party that there are people who will still stand on principle, these key principles that I keep repeating, equality and liberty, and that we will not go along with the Republicans if they're going to become a populist, white nationalist, or white supremacist party. Principled constitutional conservatives are just not going to go along with that.
What's your opinion of elected Republicans like Colorado Congressman Mike Coffman, who won't tell voters who they're going to vote for president?
Well, I think that's unfortunate, and I don't think that's real leadership. I think there are a lot of people a lot of members of Congress, for example, who after Donald Trump was exposed as bragging about sexually assaulting women, after that, a lot of members of Congress and others distanced themselves from Trump and withdrew even their endorsements. Not all of them withdrew their endorsements. Some of them just condemned the comments but didn't withdraw them. But anyway, the point is some of them did. But then they stop short of saying what they're for and then fighting for it. And that's what leadership actually is. Leadership is not just saying what you're against, but it's saying what you're for and then fighting for it. This country is in a leadership crisis, I believe. I think Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump personify that. But also these leaders who won't say what they're for and won't fight for a positive path forward for the country, I believe they're part of it too. I think our leaders often lack courage. They're not. They lack conviction around principle, and they put party ahead of the country and ahead of the American people's interests. They put power over principle, and we just can't have that in our leaders.
Between the two major party candidates, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, which of them strikes you as the more morally sound choice?
Oh, well, look, you're asking me to make a lesser of two evils decision, and I'm calling on Americans to do better than that. We need better leaders in this country. We've gotten ourselves in this rut of believing that these are the kinds of decisions we have to make, especially with our elected leaders and the votes we make. As a result of that, we've lowered our standards for our leaders, and by lowering our standards for our leaders, we've gotten the kind of leaders that we have now who lack courage and principle and who put their own interests ahead of the American people. So I'm not going to answer that question because I think it's the wrong question, and it's a fair question, one I'm asked a lot. But we need to start proactively searching for leaders who are honest and wise and promoting them into office rather than passively waiting for the two major parties to give us what they give us, because it's just not working.
Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for stopping in Denver.
Thank you.